Could one of the most glamorous women in the world be hiding a secret life so shocking that even the tabloids wouldn't dare report it? That's exactly the question the world is asking after Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, broke her silence. For years, Meghan Markle has been scrutinized under the relentless gaze of the public eye. From her fairy tale wedding with Prince Harry to the controversies that followed their exit from royal duties. But nothing prepared the world for what Ferguson recently revealed, a side of Meghan that few suspected existed, a story so wild it seems almost unbelievable. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine this, the shimmering lights of London fading behind you, the hum of private yachts, the elite secrecy of Soho House, and a night that promised glamour, luxury, and power. For Meghan, it was more than just an escape. It was a glimpse into a world where influence, temptation, and indulgence intertwine. But the stories Sarah Ferguson disclosed aren't just about parties or exclusive invites. They reveal a network of connections, a web of encounters, and a lifestyle that challenges the very image the public has of Meghan. From the outside, Meghan has always been poised, polished, and seemingly untouchable. The Duchess everyone watched on television, read about in magazines, and adored for her style and sophistication, had a life behind the velvet ropes that nobody truly saw. Ferguson's revelations suggest a pattern of behavior, a series of choices, and encounters that might redefine how the world perceives the woman who married into the British royal family. Let's pause for a moment and think about what it means to live in a world where every action is scrutinized, every choice potentially scandalous, and every secret can explode into a headline overnight. For Meghan, the stakes were even higher. Not only was her personal reputation on the line, but the image of the royal family itself. It's one thing to navigate the glamorous circles of Hollywood, but it's entirely another to do so while the world watches, judges, and occasionally misinterprets every step. Sarah Ferguson didn't hold back when she described the Soho House yacht days, nights where Meghan, according to Ferguson, mingled with some of the most influential men in the city. These weren't casual dinners or public galas. These were events shrouded in exclusivity, marked by secrecy, and charged with attention that only those familiar with the elite social scene could truly understand. Ferguson painted a picture of indulgence, power, and temptation, and in doing so, revealed that Meghan's private life was far more intricate and, perhaps, controversial than anyone could have imagined. But why does this matter now? Why should anyone care about yacht parties, exclusive clubs, and high-profile gatherings that happened before Meghan became a member of the royal family? The answer is simple. Perception is reality. In the modern world, where every action can be recorded, analyzed, and judged by millions, these revelations aren't just gossip. They provide insight into character, decision-making, and the lengths to which someone might go to maintain influence, connections, or personal freedom. And in Meghan's case, they might also reveal a side of her personality that contradicts the carefully curated image presented to the world. There's also the question of context. What exactly was happening during these Soho House nights? Who were the men involved, and why does Ferguson suggest there were as many as 135 encounters? These aren't idle numbers or exaggerations. They hint at a pattern of behavior, at choices that could have repercussions not just socially, but potentially legally and politically. Every anecdote, every whispered conversation, every moment on the yacht contributes to a larger narrative, a puzzle that, until Ferguson spoke out, had remained incomplete. As we explore this story, it's essential to remember the stakes. Meghan's public persona is meticulously maintained. Every smile, every gesture, every public appearance has been orchestrated to project an image of elegance, charity, and modern royalty. But Ferguson's revelations suggest that beneath this polished surface, there were moments of indulgence and interaction that few outsiders, or even royal insiders, could have predicted. It raises questions about authenticity, morality, and the pressures of living a life under constant scrutiny. And yet, it's not just about scandal. There's a human element to this story, too. Meghan was navigating fame, ambition, and personal relationships all at once. The allure of exclusive parties, the charm of influential figures, and the freedom of private settings created an environment where boundaries were tested and decisions were amplified. Ferguson's insider perspective allows us to glimpse the tension between personal desire and public expectation, a conflict that resonates far beyond the gilded walls of Soho House. But even as Ferguson tells her story, she leaves us with questions. Why did Meghan choose to engage in these interactions? Was it a calculated strategy to expand influence? Or was it a search for personal connection in a world where genuine relationships are rare? And perhaps most provocatively, what does this tell us about the lengths to which someone will go to assert agency in an environment where power, image, and opportunity collide? To fully understand the gravity of these revelations, consider the broader context of Meghan's life at the time. She was navigating the intersection of Hollywood celebrity culture and British royal expectations. Both worlds demand perfection, yet both offer vastly different social codes and pressures. The Soho House yacht events, as Ferguson describes them, were not merely indulgent escapades. They were testing grounds, arenas where reputations could be made or broken. Every smile, every toast, every whispered conversation carried significance. And there's more. Ferguson hints at moments that defy easy categorization, times when Meghan's actions appeared strategic, impulsive, or simply human in a world that often demands inhuman perfection. These details, scattered throughout the narrative, serve to deepen the intrigue and keep the audience guessing. How much of Meghan's behavior was calculated, and how much was simply the result of living in extraordinary circumstances? As we move into the main chapters of this exposé, keep these questions in mind. Each chapter will peel back another layer of Meghan's Soho House yacht days, revealing encounters, decisions, and secrets that build on Ferguson's dramatic testimony. From the initial invitation that set everything in motion to the shocking revelations about the 135 men, every detail matters. And with each chapter, the tension escalates, the stakes grow higher, and the line between public image and private reality blurs even further. By the end of this introduction, one thing is clear. This isn't just another royal scandal story. It's a window into a world of secrecy, influence, and human complexity. It's a reminder that behind every polished public persona, there may be experiences, choices, and events that are far more complicated and far more revealing than anyone could imagine. So, what exactly happened on those yachts? Who were the men involved, and how did these encounters shape Meghan's path to royalty? And most importantly, why did Sarah Ferguson feel compelled to share these details now, after years of silence? These are the questions that will drive the story forward, creating tension, drama, and curiosity at every turn. Duchess's life? For Meghan Markle, the answer was yes. It started innocuously, with a discreet message tucked into her social calendar, a private invite to a Soho House yacht party. To the untrained eye, it looked like another exclusive event in the city's glittering nightlife. But for those who knew the undercurrents of London's elite social scene, it was far more than that. This was an entry point into a world where power, wealth, and secrecy collided, and where one night could set in motion a chain of events that would define reputations for years to come. Meghan had already been navigating Hollywood's social currents, but this was different. The yacht parties at Soho House were legendary in their exclusivity. Names of attendees were whispered among insiders, and the mere mention of the events conjured images of opulence, indulgence, and unspoken rules. It was a world where everyone watched everyone else, where a misstep could be magnified into scandal, and where influence was both currency and weapon. The invitation itself was a subtle test, a way to see if Meghan could fit into a scene that demanded more than charm. It demanded presence, poise, and the ability to navigate complex social hierarchies with effortless grace. From the moment Meghan received the invite, curiosity and apprehension mingled in equal measure. She was stepping into a space where appearances were everything. Yet the truth of what happened behind the closed doors was often far more dramatic than any public narrative. The yacht, moored discreetly in the Thames, shimmered under the city lights like a floating palace. Music floated across the water, mingling with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the subtle hum of conversation in multiple languages. Every guest had a story, and every story carried weight. Ferguson describes Meghan's first moments on the yacht as a mix of exhilaration and anxiety. She had to navigate a delicate balance, to appear effortlessly charming without seeming naive, to engage with powerful men without appearing opportunistic, and to maintain a sense of control in an environment designed to test limits. These early encounters set the tone for what Ferguson would later reveal as a pattern of high-stakes social maneuvering. Each smile, each laugh, each casual comment was a strategic choice, conscious or otherwise. But the yacht itself was more than a backdrop. It was an arena, a stage where the elite displayed their status, their wealth, and their influence. The spaces were meticulously curated: plush seating, discreet alcoves for private conversations, and decks that overlooked the city skyline, shimmering in the twilight. Ferguson emphasizes that the environment itself contributed to the intensity of the nights. Glamour, alcohol, music, and the intoxicating energy of exclusivity combined to create a scenario where boundaries blurred and inhibitions often dissolved. For Meghan, this world was intoxicating, but also perilous. She was under constant observation, not just by her peers, but by the invisible audience of gossip, rumor, and the ever-watchful media. The presence of powerful figures, some known, some shrouded in anonymity, added layers of complexity. Each encounter could enhance her reputation, but a misstep could just as easily become a headline. Ferguson suggests that Meghan quickly learned to navigate these dynamics with skill, reading the room, understanding subtle power plays, and aligning herself strategically without appearing calculating. Yet, the very nature of these events carried an inherent contradiction. On one hand, they were glamorous and liberating, a playground for the elite. On the other hand, they were high-pressure, performative, and fraught with potential pitfalls. Ferguson describes moments where Meghan's composure was tested, where she had to make quick decisions under the scrutiny of people who had everything to gain from her mistakes. There was a constant tension between authenticity and performance, between personal desire and public perception. What made these nights even more compelling, according to Ferguson, were the unexpected interactions. Guests arrived with hidden agendas, conversations held in hushed tones, and connections formed that would later ripple through both Meghan's personal and public life. The yacht wasn't just a party. It was a nexus of influence, a place where reputations were negotiated, alliances formed, and secrets exchanged. Ferguson emphasizes that while the public saw a smiling, poised Meghan at events, the reality behind the scenes was far more intricate, filled with subtle negotiations and strategic engagements. It was during these early parties that Ferguson observed patterns that would later become central to her revelations. Meghan's interactions weren't random. They followed a rhythm that combined charm, attentiveness, and an uncanny sense of social intelligence. She could read the desires and intentions of others, responding in ways that maximized engagement while minimizing exposure. Ferguson's account paints a picture of a young duchess learning the unwritten rules of an elite world, a world where power, desire, and secrecy intermingled in ways few could understand. Audience, consider this. Have you ever walked into a room where you felt every eye evaluating you, every gesture analyzed, and every smile weighed for meaning? Now imagine that room multiplied, filled with people whose influence stretches across industries, governments, and media empires. That was Meghan's first night on the Soho House yacht. She was both participant and observer, performer and strategist, all at once. Ferguson's narrative suggests that these nights honed her instincts in ways that would later impact her public persona and private decisions. Yet, it wasn't all calculated. Ferguson hints at moments of spontaneity, flirtation, and human error that added drama to the narrative. Meghan was navigating her own curiosity, desire, and ambition in a space that encouraged excess. There were risks in every interaction, and Ferguson makes it clear that Meghan was acutely aware of them. These moments, Ferguson suggests, are what made the story both fascinating and controversial. A public figure operating in a private world where the stakes were immense and the consequences unpredictable. The story also raises broader questions about privacy, agency, and judgment. How much of Meghan's behavior was authentic, and how much was a response to the pressures of social expectation? What choices did she make freely, and which were influenced by the intensity of the environment. Ferguson's perspective provides a rare insider view, showing not just the events themselves, but the emotional and psychological context behind them. And then there was the anticipation. The very fact of the invitation created a ripple effect, as Meghan considered her presence, her wardrobe, her demeanor, and her strategy. Ferguson describes the mix of excitement and tension, the sense that a single night could set a precedent for the social battles and negotiations to come. Every detail mattered: how she entered the yacht, whom she spoke to first, the subtle signals she sent to indicate confidence and influence. Even as Meghan stepped onto the yacht that night, unaware of the full ramifications, Ferguson observed that the dynamics were already in motion. Patterns were forming, reputations were being tested, and secrets were beginning to accumulate. For the audience, it's a moment of high drama. One seemingly simple invitation was not just a night of glamour, but a catalyst for events that would ripple through Meghan's life for years. And as the night unfolded, Ferguson hints at encounters that would later become central to the more controversial aspects of her story. Names whispered in private, interactions that were fleeting yet consequential, and moments of personal choice that carried outsized significance. This was the beginning of Meghan's Soho House yacht days, a period that Ferguson describes with both admiration and incredulity. What really happens behind closed doors? Not the polished smiles and staged photos, but the moments nobody reports, the whispered deals, the secret games of influence. That's the world Meghan Markle stepped into during her Soho House yacht nights. A world layered with power, temptation, and rules that weren't written anywhere, except in the instincts of those who had navigated it for years. From the first steps onto the yacht, Meghan was being observed, studied, and subtly tested. Guests didn't just mingle casually. They evaluated, compared, and positioned themselves in a constant social chess game. Ferguson emphasizes that this wasn't a place for naive charm alone. It required strategy, subtlety, and the ability to understand the invisible currents of power. Every glance, every gesture, every laugh carried meaning. Meghan had to learn fast, or risk being left behind. Imagine walking into a room where the elite of London quietly judge everything you do. There's a pressure that's invisible yet suffocating, a sense that every action can ripple outward in ways you cannot predict. Ferguson describes these yachts as microcosms of influence, where the line between casual conversation and high-stakes negotiation blurred. A simple toast could open doors or close them forever. A compliment could be remembered. A mistake could be fatal to one's social reputation. And yet, Meghan was not alone. Ferguson recounts that the Duchess had allies, subtle connections in the crowd who offered guidance and protection. But even allies were double-edged. They could help or hinder, depending on the circumstances. The social game was layered and complex, and Ferguson paints a vivid picture of Meghan navigating it with a mixture of confidence, curiosity, and careful calculation. The yacht itself played a role in the drama. Its layout encouraged intimacy and exclusivity. Alcoves for private conversations, decks overlooking the water, and lounges with carefully curated seating all shaped the interactions. Ferguson highlights how the design created both opportunity and risk. Meghan could be seen by everyone, but still find moments of privacy. She could engage in conversation with influential figures without making her intentions obvious. It was the perfect stage for someone learning the nuances of high-level social maneuvering. Yet the environment wasn't without its contradictions. Glamour and indulgence existed alongside pressure and scrutiny. Alcohol flowed freely, music pulsed, and laughter echoed, creating a sense of liberation. But beneath it all, tension simmered. Every guest had an agenda, and every interaction carried weight. Ferguson notes that Meghan quickly learned the delicate balance between enjoying herself and maintaining control, between blending in and standing out. But it wasn't just the men who tested her skills. The women at these events were equally influential, equally calculating, and often just as competitive. Ferguson describes encounters with high-powered women whose subtle signals tested Meghan's social intelligence, who would engage her genuinely, who would watch from a distance, and who would try to manipulate situations for advantage. Meghan had to read it all. Every laugh, every touch, every whispered word conveyed information, and Ferguson emphasizes that missing a single nuance could have consequences. This is where the drama intensifies. Ferguson recounts moments when Meghan was faced with choices that seemed trivial but were loaded with significance. Whom to trust, how to respond to flattery, when to speak or remain silent. All of these decisions carried consequences that extended far beyond the yacht. And while the public saw Meghan as poised and composed, Ferguson reveals that behind that elegance was a woman constantly calculating, balancing instinct with perception. The tension was not just social but emotional. Ferguson notes that Meghan was navigating her own ambitions, desires, and vulnerabilities. In a setting designed to test boundaries, emotions ran high. Desire for approval, fear of judgment, and the thrill of opportunity created an environment ripe for both mistakes and strategic brilliance. Ferguson portrays Meghan as acutely aware of these dynamics, learning quickly how to adapt without appearing reactive. Audience, consider this. Have you ever been in a situation where every decision mattered, yet no one explained the rules? Imagine doing it surrounded by people whose influence could shape your future. Ferguson's account paints Meghan as both student and performer, constantly observing, learning, and adjusting. Every compliment she gave, every conversation she initiated, and every interaction she navigated contributed to an intricate social dance that few outsiders could comprehend. Then there were the moments that blurred lines even further. Ferguson hints at interactions that were flirtatious, playful, or deliberately provocative. Not scandals in themselves, but encounters that carried implications, testing boundaries in subtle ways. Meghan's choices in these moments demonstrated her social intelligence, but also exposed her to potential scrutiny. Every move was a balancing act between freedom and discretion, between engagement and restraint. Ferguson's insights reveal that this world behind the velvet rope was not for the faint of heart. It demanded acute perception, charisma, and adaptability. Meghan's ability to navigate these waters, according to Ferguson, was both impressive and strategic. She could connect, charm, and align herself with influence without overtly appearing calculated, a skill that would serve her well in both Hollywood and royal circles. But Ferguson also notes the contradictions in Meghan's behavior. She could be warm and engaging, yet guarded, playful yet deliberate. This duality made her enigmatic and magnetic, but it also created tension and curiosity among those around her. Guests were drawn to her charm, but also speculated about her motives. This ambiguity amplified the drama, creating stories that would linger long after the parties ended. Ferguson's description also includes the subtle signals of power and status at play. The way Meghan was introduced, the positioning of guests, the ordering of drinks, and even the music, all of it contributed to a carefully curated hierarchy. Ferguson emphasizes that understanding these signals was key to surviving, thriving, and being remembered in this world. Meghan's attentiveness to these nuances suggests an instinctive grasp of social strategy, a skill that would later define much of her public life. And just when it seemed that Meghan had mastered the flow of these yacht nights, Ferguson hints at moments of unpredictability. Guests who arrived unexpectedly, conversations that shifted in tone, and private interactions that carried hidden significance all contributed to a sense of tension and suspense. These moments kept Meghan on edge, testing her instincts and judgment. As the night progressed, Ferguson notes that Meghan's presence began to draw attention not just for her charm, but for her ability to navigate the complexities of elite social life. She became a participant, observer, and, in some ways, a catalyst for events around her. Ferguson suggests that these interactions were formative, teaching Meghan lessons about influence, perception, and discretion that few could learn anywhere else. And yet, there were still risks. The environment was intoxicating, and not every choice was without consequence. Ferguson hints at whispers, rumors, and subtle maneuverings that would later surface in ways that challenged Meghan's public image. It was a delicate balancing act, and every night was a rehearsal for navigating a world where perception often outweighs reality. Imagine a night where every detail is magnified, every glance carries weight, and every interaction could shift the balance of influence. That was the Soho House yacht for Meghan Markle, a floating stage where glamour met power and discretion danced with temptation. Ferguson's account paints a vivid picture, a setting that was both exhilarating and treacherous, a playground for the elite where boundaries were fluid and reputations were tested in ways no one could anticipate. The yacht itself was a marvel of design and opulence. Plush seating arranged to encourage private conversations, soft lighting that created intimacy without suffocating visibility, and decks overlooking the London skyline all combined to craft an atmosphere both inviting and high-stakes. Ferguson emphasizes that the environment was instrumental in shaping interactions. It wasn't just a venue. It was a character in the story, a silent orchestrator that guided the behaviors, conversations, and social calculations of every guest aboard. From the moment Meghan stepped on board, she became part of a social ecosystem in which every action mattered. Ferguson notes that these early nights served as both observation and initiation. Meghan had to understand subtle hierarchies, gauge alliances, and anticipate the moves of others. Who dominated conversations? Who whispered in corners? Who seemed to be watching everyone while saying little? These questions framed the landscape in which she operated. And then came the encounters. Ferguson's revelations suggest a staggering level of interaction, 135 men, according to her account. The number alone captures attention, but the significance lies in the pattern. These weren't merely casual introductions. These were moments of connection, observation, and influence. Ferguson explains that each encounter carried unspoken meaning. A handshake, a toast, a smile could serve as a signal, a test, or a subtle negotiation. Meghan had to navigate each with poise, reading personalities, interpreting intentions, and maintaining control over how she was perceived. Audience, consider this: 135 interactions, each potentially consequential. Could you maintain awareness, strategy, and charm under that kind of scrutiny? Ferguson portrays Meghan as not just surviving but thriving, demonstrating a keen understanding of human behavior, social signaling, and the rhythms of elite interaction. It was a baptism by fire, a rapid education in the subtleties of influence and the power dynamics that permeated these exclusive gatherings. Ferguson also highlights the emotional intensity of these nights. The glamour was intoxicating. Music, laughter, and the gentle sway of the yacht all contributed to a heady atmosphere. But the stakes were real. Guests arrived with expectations, intentions, and ambitions. Some sought alliances, others admiration, and some simply watched to see who would falter. Meghan had to manage her own emotions while reading those of others, balancing confidence with humility, charm with discretion. Ferguson notes that this emotional calibration was key to her early success aboard the yacht. Yet there was tension in the air. Ferguson recalls moments when the flow of conversation shifted suddenly, when whispers in corners hinted at underlying power struggles, and when subtle tests of loyalty or discretion emerged. Meghan had to respond in real time, adjusting her behavior to maintain favor, avoid missteps, and protect her burgeoning reputation. Every decision mattered, every reaction was observed, and every interaction could ripple outward beyond the confines of the yacht. Ferguson emphasizes that this wasn't a world of casual socializing. The yacht operated as a microcosm of influence, a concentrated environment where reputation, charm, and strategy intersected. The presence of high-profile men, each with their own agendas, added complexity to the interactions. Ferguson recounts moments of flirtation, negotiation, and subtle maneuvering that required Meghan to be constantly alert, simultaneously engaging and cautious. The narrative takes on further drama when Ferguson describes the dichotomy of visibility and secrecy. In public, Meghan appeared composed and confident. Behind closed doors, the dynamics were more intricate. Private corners allowed for intimate conversation. Small groups offered opportunities to influence, observe, or be influenced. Ferguson notes that these contrasting layers created both opportunity and risk. Meghan had to master the art of appearing effortless while executing careful social strategy. It was during these yacht nights that Ferguson observed patterns in Meghan's behavior. She seemed to understand instinctively which interactions demanded attention, which could be playful, and which required careful negotiation. Ferguson suggests that Meghan developed a rhythm, learning to pace herself emotionally, socially, and strategically across long evenings filled with shifting dynamics. The Duchess became adept at reading subtle cues, body language, tone, and the unspoken rules that govern behavior in elite spaces. But not all interactions were calculated. Ferguson reveals moments of spontaneity, laughter, and even vulnerability. Meghan's charm, warmth, and relatability drew people in, yet Ferguson hints that this openness also created complications. Not every response was fully controlled. Some moments allowed curiosity, desire, or personal impulses to surface, introducing unpredictability into an otherwise strategic environment. These human moments made Meghan relatable, but they also amplified intrigue, gossip, and speculation. Audience, think about this. Navigating dozens of high-stakes interactions in a single night, managing appearances while observing hidden agendas, balancing authenticity with strategy. How would anyone maintain control? Ferguson portrays Meghan as exceptionally capable, but the narrative never shies away from highlighting the tension, the risks, and the ever-present potential for miscalculation. And then there were the power dynamics. Ferguson notes that not every man aboard the yacht approached Meghan with pure intent. Some sought influence, some flirtation, and some simply observation. Each encounter required evaluation. Was this a test, an opportunity, or a trap? Meghan had to discern motivations quickly and subtly, a skill that Ferguson claims she honed rapidly over successive nights aboard the yacht. Ferguson also emphasizes the intensity of the social hierarchy. Not all interactions were equal. Some were fleeting, others more significant, and a few carried weight that could echo long after the party ended. Meghan's ability to identify and navigate these distinctions set her apart from others in attendance. She learned when to engage fully, when to observe silently, and when to withdraw, all critical skills in a world where appearances and perception carried outsized influence. Yet the environment was not purely transactional. Ferguson recounts moments of levity, humor, and unexpected human connection. These instances added layers to the narrative. Charm mingled with strategy, entertainment with subtle negotiation, and glamour with tension. Ferguson portrays Meghan as both participant and observer, thriving in the energy while managing the stakes. Then came the whispers, the subtle rumors, shared in corners or through fleeting glances. Ferguson hints that some encounters carried implications far beyond casual interaction. Every gesture was potentially scrutinized, every smile analyzed, and every interaction remembered. Meghan's challenge was to maintain composure, control narrative perception, and avoid mistakes that could be amplified publicly. The tension of the yacht nights built towards something Ferguson describes as a turning point. Meghan's ability to navigate the social currents was tested as new players entered the scene, dynamics shifted unexpectedly, and interactions carried higher stakes. These were the nights where reputations could be solidified or jeopardized. Every choice mattered. What happens when you mix fame, influence, and secrecy in one place? Ferguson's account suggests that Meghan Markle's Soho House yacht nights were far more than mere social gatherings. They were arenas where reputations were made, alliances tested, and personal boundaries challenged. Among the glittering crowd, a series of high-profile encounters would leave lasting impressions, not just on Meghan herself, but on the social ecosystem surrounding her. Ferguson recalls that from the outset, the guest list was deliberately curated. The men in attendance weren't just wealthy. They were influential, powerful, and in some cases, connected to the highest levels of business, media, and entertainment. Each interaction held potential consequences, and each conversation carried weight beyond the immediate moment. Meghan was stepping into a world where charisma alone wasn't enough. Social intelligence, emotional awareness, and subtle negotiation were essential. Imagine the tension. Each handshake, each toast, each casual conversation could open doors or close them forever. Ferguson emphasizes that Meghan quickly learned how to identify the men whose influence mattered most, how to approach them without appearing calculating, and how to leave an impression that would ripple far beyond the night itself. There was strategy in every smile, timing in every laugh, and intention behind every word. But these encounters weren't one-dimensional. Ferguson describes them as layered, nuanced, and occasionally contradictory. Some men were flirtatious, others reserved, and a few appeared to be testing her, probing for confidence, resilience, or vulnerability. Meghan's ability to navigate these differing energies became a hallmark of her early Soho House experience. Ferguson suggests that she blended charm, attentiveness, and subtle authority to maintain control over each interaction, even when dynamics shifted unexpectedly. Audience, think about this. Have you ever been in a room where everyone has an agenda, yet each person expects you to maintain composure, engage sincerely, and simultaneously protect yourself? Ferguson paints Meghan as mastering this delicate balance, moving seamlessly from conversation to conversation, adjusting tone, posture, and language to match the stakes of each interaction. It was a skill set few could possess, and Ferguson underscores how quickly Meghan honed it under pressure. Among the high-profile encounters, Ferguson recalls certain moments that stood out for their intensity. Men who wielded power, not just wealth, approached Meghan with interest that bordered on curiosity, strategy, or even evaluation. Ferguson suggests that these encounters weren't merely social, they were tests. Meghan had to gauge intentions, respond appropriately, and maintain an image that balanced intrigue with discretion. One wrong move, one misjudged gesture, could have amplified scrutiny or rumors. Yet there was also humanity beneath the strategic engagement. Ferguson notes that Meghan wasn't simply performing. She was learning, observing, and forming genuine impressions. Some encounters sparked conversations that were intellectually stimulating, others emotionally resonant, and a few sparked moments of flirtation and playful tension. Ferguson portrays Meghan as both calculating and human, aware of stakes, yet responsive to the immediate social environment. The narrative deepens when Ferguson recounts encounters with individuals whose reputations preceded them. Certain men were notorious for their influence in business, media, or entertainment. Their attention wasn't casual. It carried implications for reputation, opportunity, and future connection. Ferguson emphasizes that Meghan had to navigate this web carefully, discerning between genuine interest, strategic engagement, and potential risk. Each decision, whom to speak with, how to engage, what topics to touch, was laden with consequence. And then there were the unexpected interactions. Ferguson describes moments where individuals entered conversations unannounced, shifting dynamics, and testing Meghan's adaptability. She had to respond in real time, balancing curiosity with caution, charm with control. These spontaneous interactions often revealed deeper layers of influence, power, and social maneuvering that Meghan had to integrate into her approach immediately. The stakes were further amplified by the environment itself. The yacht's design encouraged private conversation while maintaining visibility. Ferguson highlights how Meghan used these spaces strategically, moving between open areas and private alcoves to manage interactions. The physical layout became a tool in her social strategy, allowing her to engage selectively, observe attentively, and maintain both presence and discretion. Ferguson also notes the subtle signals of power that permeated the yacht, how guests positioned themselves, the timing of entrances, the sequencing of conversations. All these details carried meaning. Meghan's attentiveness to these nuances allowed her to anticipate shifts in dynamics, respond proactively, and maintain control over her social footprint. Each successful engagement reinforced her growing confidence and influence within the elite circle. Yet not all encounters were smooth. Ferguson recalls moments of tension, subtle tests, and interactions fraught with potential pitfalls. A misread signal, an ambiguous comment, or an unintended impression could ripple outward in unforeseen ways. Meghan had to balance charm, attentiveness, and awareness while managing her emotional responses, a skill Ferguson highlights as critical to her success during these nights. Audience, consider the intensity. Hundreds of interactions over successive yacht nights, each carrying layered implications for reputation, alliances, and perception. How would anyone maintain composure, strategy, and authenticity under that kind of pressure? Ferguson portrays Meghan as exceptional in this regard, learning rapidly, adapting intuitively, and refining her approach with each encounter. The drama escalates as Ferguson recounts an encounter that would later become central to the controversy surrounding Meghan's Soho House days. It involved a figure of extraordinary influence, whose attention both elevated Meghan's status and introduced new complexities. Ferguson hints that this meeting was a turning point, not just socially but emotionally, leaving Meghan with choices that would have lasting consequences. Who really pulls the strings behind the velvet curtain of elite social scenes? Ferguson's account suggests that Meghan Markle's Soho House yacht nights weren't just about glamour, flirtation, or fleeting encounters. They were an entry point into a tightly knit inner circle, a network of influence and power that operated behind layers of secrecy. This was the world where decisions were made quietly, reputations were curated meticulously, and alliances could be as fleeting as a toast raised on a shimmering deck. From the very first nights, Meghan wasn't just participating. She was observing, absorbing, and evaluating the subtle social architecture around her. Ferguson describes a hierarchy within the guests. Some were obvious leaders whose influence was palpable, while others operated in shadow, quietly assessing, connecting, and controlling narratives without drawing attention to themselves. Meghan had to learn fast who mattered, who could help, and who to approach with caution. The inner circle, Ferguson reveals, was small but potent. These were men and women whose influence spanned industries, media moguls, financiers, Hollywood executives, and behind-the-scenes power brokers. Ferguson emphasizes that gaining access to this circle required more than charm. It demanded intelligence, discernment, and a keen sense of social strategy. Meghan had to demonstrate that she belonged, not merely by showing charisma, but by signaling insight, discretion, and awareness of the unspoken rules that governed interactions. Audience, imagine being in a room where every smile, handshake, and gesture is evaluated, not for superficial charm, but for your capacity to understand influence, navigate power, and leave a subtle yet lasting impression. Ferguson paints Meghan as mastering this environment, slowly but surely identifying patterns, reading personalities, and making strategic choices about whom to engage and how. She was learning the social code of the elite, a code unspoken yet rigidly enforced. What Ferguson finds particularly striking is Meghan's ability to balance inclusion with discernment. While she was becoming visible to the inner circle, she wasn't overexposed. She cultivated selective relationships, choosing when to connect, whom to flatter, and how to position herself. This wasn't manipulation. It was survival, a skill required in a space where missteps could be magnified into scandal and every interaction could affect her reputation. Within the inner circle, Ferguson recounts, there were key figures whose attention carried extraordinary weight. Their recognition wasn't given lightly. It was earned through observation, subtle engagement, and, crucially, the perception of discretion. Meghan's early interactions with these individuals demonstrated her capacity to navigate nuanced social dynamics, blending charm with calculated awareness. Ferguson suggests that it was here, among the most influential guests, that Meghan's reputation began to solidify. Not as a Hollywood star or a royal bride-to-be, but as a figure capable of operating within an elite ecosystem with intelligence and grace. Yet, this proximity to influence came with contradictions and challenges. Ferguson emphasizes that the inner circle was simultaneously inviting and intimidating. Some interactions were opportunities for genuine connection and mentorship, while others were subtle tests designed to gauge loyalty, judgment, and composure. Meghan had to differentiate between gestures of support and those of evaluation, a task requiring both intuition and strategy. The dynamics weren't limited to men, either. Ferguson highlights that women in the inner circle played equally strategic roles. They were observers, advisors, competitors, and allies, often subtly guiding the flow of interaction. Meghan had to navigate these complex relationships, discerning friend from rival, and understanding the subtle signals that indicated intentions. Ferguson notes that this ability to read social nuance set Meghan apart and allowed her to maintain an influential position within the Yacht's ecosystem. But it wasn't just social strategy that Ferguson points out, it was the psychological pressure. Being part of the inner circle meant constant observation, amplified expectations, and the understanding that a single misstep could have far-reaching consequences. Meghan had to project confidence while remaining approachable, exuding charisma while signaling discretion. Ferguson describes it as walking a tightrope over a sea of expectation, temptation, and judgment, where balance was critical and miscalculation could be costly. Then there were the rituals of inclusion. Ferguson details private moments, from intimate conversations to small group interactions, that signaled acceptance into the inner circle. These weren't casual gestures. They were rites of passage, subtle affirmations of belonging. Meghan's participation in these moments, according to Ferguson, demonstrated her social acuity, her emotional intelligence, and her growing understanding of power dynamics. Each interaction reinforced her status, yet also carried hidden obligations, subtle rules, and the expectation of discretion. Audience, pause for a moment and imagine the stakes. Hundreds of interactions, dozens of influential figures, and one misjudged gesture could reverberate across industries and media. Ferguson portrays Meghan as remarkably adept at this balancing act. She could engage, charm, and influence without overexposing herself, maintaining both visibility and discretion. An essential skill for anyone hoping to operate successfully within an elite inner circle. The tension escalates when Ferguson hints at moments where Meghan's presence disrupted existing dynamics. Some individuals were curious, others cautious, and a few appeared threatened. Meghan's blend of charm, intelligence, and strategic awareness shifted the social balance in subtle ways. These shifts were not always predictable and required constant vigilance on her part. Ferguson emphasizes that the inner circle is not static. It is fluid, competitive, and often unforgiving. Success demands constant recalibration. Ferguson also details encounters that blurred the lines between social, professional, and personal influence. Certain interactions had implications beyond the immediate night, subtly shaping opportunities, alliances, and reputations. Meghan's ability to navigate these blurred boundaries became a critical skill, allowing her to engage meaningfully without compromising her discretion or autonomy. It was this skill, Ferguson suggests, that enabled Meghan to establish lasting credibility within the inner circle. Yet even as Meghan gained confidence and acceptance, Ferguson hints at underlying risks. Some members of the inner circle were not allies. They were observers, competitors, or individuals with agendas that could conflict with hers. Each encounter required vigilance, discernment, and the ability to maintain composure under scrutiny. Ferguson portrays these nights as a high-stakes social education, where Meghan learned the nuances of influence, loyalty, and reputation. What goes on when the public isn't watching? Ferguson's account exposes a world behind the glossy Instagram photos, curated press releases, and smiling public appearances. A world of whispered conversations, subtle negotiations, and hidden deals that defined Meghan Markle's Soho House yacht days. This was not merely socializing. It was strategic, high stakes, and sometimes morally ambiguous. Every exchange carried meaning. Every laugh could be a signal, and every glance might conceal intention. From the outset, Ferguson emphasizes Meghan was entering a network where secrecy was paramount. The yacht itself was designed to encourage privacy. Secluded decks, hidden alcoves, and dimly lit corners offered spaces for conversation out of the public eye. Ferguson describes how Meghan quickly learned to use these spaces, not just to socialize, but to gather information, observe behavior, and make assessments about trust, influence, and opportunity. Each whispered word was a piece of a larger social puzzle, and Meghan's ability to decipher it became increasingly sharp. Audience, imagine being surrounded by hundreds of influential figures, each with hidden motives, secret agendas, and their own reputation to protect. Every smile, every handshake, every casual comment could carry implications far beyond what was immediately apparent. Ferguson paints Meghan as both a participant and a strategist. Someone learning to operate in this covert arena with precision, charm, and an acute awareness of risk. The whispers Ferguson describes weren't idle gossip. They were coded, strategic, and often served as tests. Meghan had to discern what was meaningful, what was distraction, and what could later be leveraged for influence. Ferguson recounts moments where Meghan overheard information that shifted her understanding of the social hierarchy, revealed alliances, and exposed rivalries. This information was currency in a world where perception often outweighed reality. Hidden deals were another layer entirely. Ferguson details instances where private agreements, subtle promises, and unspoken understandings governed interactions. These deals were rarely formal. They existed in glances, nods, and carefully chosen words. Ferguson suggests that Meghan quickly grasped the necessity of navigating these deals carefully. How to accept influence without overcommitting, how to align strategically without being exploited, and how to maintain autonomy while still earning trust. The emotional stakes were high. Ferguson emphasizes that Meghan's presence in these private exchanges brought both opportunity and risk. Each decision, whether to engage, respond, or observe, carried potential consequences for her reputation, influence, and future social standing. Ferguson portrays Meghan as constantly calculating, balancing the thrill of connection with the danger of exposure. It was a high-wire act, performed in an environment where errors could have ripple effects lasting far beyond the night. Audience, consider this. How would you respond if every whispered word and subtle gesture could alter how influential people perceived you? Meghan's skill lay not just in charm, but in reading intentions, managing impressions, and maintaining control over what was shared and what remained private. Ferguson highlights that this ability was critical in navigating a world where secrecy was as valuable as wealth, and discretion was more powerful than any public accolade. But secrets weren't merely about self-protection, they were also about opportunity. Ferguson notes that Meghan's careful attention allowed her to identify moments where she could leverage knowledge, subtly align with influence, or even anticipate shifts in the social dynamic. This gave her a form of social currency that few others possessed, a way to operate strategically without overtly signaling ambition. The interplay of whispers and deals also created tension and intrigue. Ferguson recounts moments where Meghan had to negotiate delicate situations. Conflicts between influential guests, subtle rivalries among allies, and even tests of loyalty disguised as casual conversation. Each interaction required careful consideration, balancing honesty with discretion, warmth with strategy, and engagement with observation. Ferguson emphasizes that Meghan's ability to navigate these complexities enhanced her status while keeping potential fallout minimal. Yet, Ferguson also highlights the human element. Meghan's own desires, fears, and instincts played a role in how she engaged. The stakes weren't purely social. There was emotional pressure, curiosity, and temptation. These factors complicated decisions, introduced risk, and made every whispered word or hidden deal a potential turning point. Ferguson portrays Meghan as aware of these dynamics, carefully managing her emotional responses while maintaining a strategic approach to her interactions. Some of the most critical moments occurred when Meghan observed conflicts or competitions among guests. Ferguson describes subtle power plays, a look exchanged across a table, a whispered comment meant to provoke, or an indirect challenge masked as casual conversation. Meghan learned to watch, interpret, and respond, using intuition and social intelligence to navigate situations where missteps could lead to embarrassment, exclusion, or even public scandal. The chapter also delves into the contrast between appearance and reality. Ferguson emphasizes that while the yacht nights seemed glamorous and carefree to outsiders, the underlying currents were tense and calculated. What appeared to be casual conversation often masked negotiation. What seemed like harmless flirtation could carry implications for alliances or influence. Meghan had to discern what was genuine and what was strategic, an ongoing challenge in a world where transparency was rare. Ferguson's account introduces moments of ambiguity that added intrigue. Certain interactions carried mixed signals, leaving Meghan to interpret intentions carefully. These moments were charged with potential. An ally could become a competitor, a conversation could become leverage, and a casual comment could escalate into gossip. Ferguson portrays Meghan as learning quickly how to manage these situations, demonstrating a combination of perceptiveness, charm, and strategic restraint. The tension builds as Ferguson hints at moments where Meghan's decisions would later be scrutinized, misinterpreted, or amplified. What she saw as strategic engagement could be spun as scandal. What she considered private and discreet could be exposed or misrepresented. The stakes were high, and Ferguson underscores that Meghan's ability to navigate this environment required both skill and intuition. Audience, imagine carrying the weight of 135 interactions, hidden deals, whispers, and shifting alliances, all while maintaining composure, charm, and strategic insight. Ferguson's narrative suggests that Meghan not only survived but thrived in this complex social ecosystem. Her understanding of secrecy, influence, and perception allowed her to operate in a space few could navigate successfully. Power isn't given, it's claimed. Ferguson paints Meghan Markle's Soho House yacht nights not as casual parties, but as arenas where influence was currency, and every interaction could shift the balance of social power. This was a world where charm was only the entry fee. Strategy, observation, and adaptability determined whether you thrived or merely survived. From the moment Meghan set foot on the yacht, she became part of a delicate ecosystem. Ferguson notes that every laugh, every compliment, every seemingly innocent conversation carried subtext. Who leaned in? Who lingered? Who avoided certain eyes? These subtle cues revealed allegiances, tensions, and opportunities. Meghan's challenge was to navigate these undercurrents without appearing calculated, a task that required immense social intelligence. Audience, imagine being surrounded by hundreds of influential people, each carrying ambition, curiosity, or concealed agendas. Every gesture is scrutinized, every word remembered. How would you respond? Ferguson suggests that Meghan excelled in this environment, reading microsignals that many overlooked. A tilt of the head, a pause in speech, or a glance across the room could convey volumes. She quickly learned to interpret these cues, using them to position herself strategically within the social hierarchy. Ferguson describes the yacht as a microcosm of society's elite, a place where influence was both fluid and highly codified. Certain men and women controlled the flow of conversation, the seating arrangements, and even the timing of introductions. Recognizing who held informal power was crucial. Meghan observed carefully, noting patterns, testing boundaries, and building her understanding of the rules that governed this elite social game. The game of influence wasn't always visible. Ferguson emphasizes that much of it occurred in whispers, fleeting gestures, and subtle alliances. A conversation in one corner could ripple across the entire yacht, altering perceptions and reshaping social hierarchies. Meghan's ability to track these dynamics, adapt in real time, and maintain control over her narrative was critical to her early success. There were moments when the stakes escalated. Ferguson recounts interactions that were overtly competitive, two influential guests vying for attention, a subtle challenge masked as banter, or a quiet test of loyalty disguised as casual advice. Meghan had to respond with finesse, asserting presence without arrogance, signaling intelligence without threat, and maintaining charm without vulnerability. Ferguson suggests that her skill in these high-pressure moments distinguished her from others aboard the yacht. Audience, consider the implications. Every decision, whom to speak with, when to smile, how to respond, could amplify influence or risk social misstep. Ferguson portrays Meghan as acutely aware of this reality, constantly calculating while projecting ease. Her ability to blend strategic insight with natural charisma allowed her to navigate these complex dynamics effectively, often leaving other guests both impressed and curious. The narrative intensifies as Ferguson details moments where Meghan became a pivot point in the social structure. Certain individuals gravitated toward her, consciously or subconsciously drawn by her energy, intelligence, and presence. Ferguson notes that this attention wasn't accidental. It reflected Meghan's growing understanding of influence and her ability to leverage subtle social cues to establish prominence within the inner circle. But the environment was rife with contradictions. Ferguson describes a duality where Meghan could be admired yet tested, included yet scrutinized, empowered yet constrained by perception. She had to manage optics carefully, appearing approachable while maintaining authority, engaging openly while protecting her privacy, and demonstrating warmth without compromising her position. This constant balancing act required adaptability, intuition, and emotional regulation. High-stakes moments emerged when alliances shifted unexpectedly. Ferguson recounts instances where previous allies appeared distant, rivalry surfaced, or subtle manipulations tested Meghan's judgment. Her responses in these situations revealed both her social intelligence and her capacity for strategic patience. Ferguson emphasizes that these moments were formative, teaching Meghan lessons about power, perception, and resilience that would resonate far beyond the yacht. Ferguson also introduces the role of observation. Meghan wasn't simply participating. She was learning, analyzing, and remembering. Every interaction became data. Patterns of behavior, power hierarchies, and influence networks. This analytical approach allowed her to anticipate moves, align strategically, and make calculated choices about whom to trust, how to engage, and when to assert presence. Audience, reflect on this. Navigating hundreds of complex interactions with stakes ranging from reputation to future opportunity, all while maintaining charm and discretion. How many could manage that without misstep? Ferguson portrays Meghan as exceptional, demonstrating both natural intelligence and a learned acumen that would later define her social presence on a global stage. Yet influence came with exposure. Ferguson notes that increased prominence drew scrutiny, whispers, and curiosity. Every gesture was analyzed, every connection dissected, and every choice potentially magnified. Meghan had to maintain equilibrium, balancing visibility with discretion, opportunity with caution, and engagement with strategic withdrawal. The chapter crescendos as Ferguson hints at a pivotal night. Meghan had learned the mechanics of influence, gained the attention of key players, and navigated early challenges, but one event would test her in ways that no prior encounter had. A conversation, a glance, or a decision would catalyze consequences with far-reaching implications, challenging her understanding of control, discretion, and social power. And Ferguson leaves us with a question that hangs over the narrative. Would Meghan be able to maintain influence while navigating the intensifying scrutiny, subtle tests, and unpredictable currents of the inner circle? What happens when one night reshapes the trajectory of a person's entire social life? Ferguson recounts an evening aboard the Soho House, yet that would later become a turning point in Meghan Markle's narrative, a night charged with energy, secrecy, and consequences no one could have predicted. This was the night where strategy met unpredictability, where influence clashed with temptation, and where every decision carried amplified weight. Ferguson begins by setting the scene. The yacht glimmering under London's skyline, the soft hum of music mingling with the lapping of water, and the chatter of an elite crowd whose attention could pivot on a single interaction. It was glamorous, intoxicating, and tense all at once. Every detail, from lighting to seating arrangements, was meticulously designed to encourage private interactions while maintaining a veneer of openness. Meghan had already navigated dozens of encounters, but Ferguson suggests this night was different. The stakes were higher, the players more influential, and the opportunities and risks more pronounced. From the very beginning, the tension was palpable. Ferguson notes that Meghan arrived with a keen awareness that this evening would test her ability to maintain control over perception, influence, and discretion. She was prepared, in theory, but the night's unfolding events introduced variables that challenged her strategic calculations. Every glance, every word, every gesture mattered more than ever. Audience, imagine being in a room where hundreds of influential figures are simultaneously observing you. Some curious, some evaluating, and some calculating how to use your presence to their advantage. How would you react when stakes are invisible but consequences are real? Ferguson portrays Meghan as moving through the crowd with composure, charm, and a calculated attentiveness that would soon be tested in unprecedented ways. As the night progressed, Ferguson recounts, Meghan encountered a series of high-profile figures whose attention carried extraordinary social and professional weight. These interactions were complex, layered, and sometimes contradictory. A smile could signal trust or flirtation, a handshake could denote alliance or evaluation, and a casual comment could trigger speculation or rumor. Meghan had to navigate these nuances, balancing strategy with authenticity, charm with discretion, and engagement with vigilance. Ferguson highlights a particularly charged moment, a conversation that appeared casual but carried hidden stakes. A guest, influential beyond most others aboard the yacht, approached Meghan with subtle intent. The exchange involved nuanced social cues, flirtation, and strategic assessment. Ferguson emphasizes that Meghan's response was both instinctive and calculated, blending warmth with control, charm with awareness, and engagement with self-protection. It was a defining moment that demonstrated her ability to operate under pressure. Yet the night wasn't solely about public interactions. Ferguson reveals that private, whispered exchanges occurred in secluded areas of the yacht. These conversations were pivotal, shaping perceptions, alliances, and social positioning. Meghan had to discern which interactions were genuine, which were strategic, and which could have lasting implications. Ferguson notes that the ability to read these subtle dynamics was critical to maintaining influence while avoiding missteps. The atmosphere was charged with emotional intensity. Ferguson recalls instances of flirtation, tension, and vulnerability, moments that tested Meghan's composure. These were interactions that could be misinterpreted or amplified, making discretion essential.